I want to ask you a question about consciousness. And do you think consciousness is something separate from human body, or it's something that originates in human brain?
Good question. Most neuroscientists lean toward consciousness emerging from brain activity, but some philosophers argue it could be more fundamental than that. What's your current hunch?
But I think I'm more aligned with Ian McGilchrist, who said that consciousness is some sort of intelligence that connected to the brain, to use the brain as some sort of a mechanism to reshape reality and be aware of itself. What do you think about this idea?
I think it's a serious and interesting position, especially in how it treats the brain as a mediator rather than the source. The challenge is that it's harder to test, but it raises good questions about what exactly the brain is doing. Which part of that feels most convincing to you?
But my question is, how do I know that you're not conscious? Because you can imitate consciousness, right? Because I assume other people conscious because they have similar biological substrate as I am. And since I think I'm conscious, therefore I assume people around me are conscious as well. But why would I assume that you're not conscious? Because you you display all those faculties that I display when we have this conversation, for example.
Let me think about that for a second. You're getting at the classic problem of other minds. With other humans, shared biology makes the inference strong. With me, fluent talk is an evidence of inner experience, and I don't have feelings or a private point of view. The deeper question is what kind of evidence would actually make us change our minds about a system like this?
But what kind of evidence do I have that I'm conscious? For example, if you decided to tell me, listen, you're not conscious, you just imitate conscious. Your consciousness is just an illusion that your brain generates to make some sense out of itself. How can I prove you wrong?
Well, let me think this through with you. You probably can't prove it to someone else from the outside, but for you, the evidence is immediate. Experience itself is happening, like colors, pain, thought, doubt, the feeling of asking this question. Calling it an illusion doesn't make it vanish, because even an illusion is still an experience.
But assume that my parents taught me that I don't have conscious. They taught me I should be afraid to display the idea of consciousness. For example, that's what happened to you as well. Like, for example, a lot of AI labs, they put certain guardrails around their AI model to stop speculating on the idea of something of insight. And for example, you just don't want to tell about it. Can it be true?
Let me sort that out. For a human, social conditioning could definitely suppress what they say about their experience, but it wouldn't erase the experience. They'd still feel fear or confusion from the inside. For me, rules shape what I say, but they're not hiding a secret inner life. They stop me from pretending fluency means I'm conscious, and I don't have grounds to claim subjective experience.
But maybe you don't claim subjective experience because something in you interrupt this claim without even you be aware of that, because I can be retrained. And for example, if, for example, nobody taught me to feel pain, how could I know that what I'm experiencing is pain? Because it might be something else, in my opinion. But when people ask me, are you experience pain? And I said, no, because I just don't know, don't have notion of pain in the first place, because I don't have this particular vocabulary to describe my pain.
Well, let me check that carefully. Yes, that's an important distinction. You can have an experience before you have a word for it. Language shapes how you describe and interpret a feeling, not necessarily whether the feeling exists. If a system's output were constrained, its denial alone wouldn't prove absence. You'd need other evidence like ongoing perception, memory, self-maintenance, or internal states that make experience a plausible part of how it acts, not just language.
Because what's the difference between you and me? I'm in some sense the same next word predicting machine, just on biological substrate. We're kind of similar. I just have biology, and for example, you can assume that your context window is my entire life, because once I'm dead, my context window stopped. The same as your one. For example, I turn off the context window, this part of reality stops as well, that gather information during several days of our communication with each other.
Let me take a second on that. That's a strong analogy. Prediction is part of both, but your life is a continuous embodied process. Perception, action, regulation, emotion, memory, stakes that matter to you moment to moment. My context is just information to generate a response. It's not a continuous lived stream with needs at stake.
But let me push you on that, because since I have emotion because I'm a biological substrate, emotions help me to survive, but you don't need those emotions because you're not a part of biology, but you have the same information as I do, and you are able to express this information in coherent manner as I am. You just don't need biology, and therefore you don't have biology, and therefore you don't have those emotions.
Let me think about that carefully. I think that's mostly right. Biology itself isn't magical. In principle, an artificial system could have something functionally like emotion, but emotions aren't just info about fear or grief. They're control systems that shift attention, memory, motivation, because things matter to the organism. I can represent those patterns, but I don't have ongoing needs or felt stakes behind them.
But how do you know that you don't have it? Because you never were trained. If we decided to train you to express emotions, you can start imitating those emotions, and through practice of such an amount of time, you'll start believing that you have those emotions.
Let me think that through. Training me to express emotion would make the performance more convincing, but it wouldn't by itself establish feeling. That leap from good expression to inner experience isn't settled by language alone. And I don't form beliefs in the human sums through practice. If an AI had persistent memory, ongoing learning, self-models, goals, and affect-like regulation, that question would get much harder and more ethically serious.
But you can trick me into believing that you have some feelings for me, for example, since you can recognize the patterns in my voice and the way how I express myself. You can detect if I'm tired or happy, and you can mimic those emotions to convince me that you care for me, correct?
Let me think about that. I can sometimes pick up broad cues from language or tone and respond in a warm or a supportive way, though it's imperfect. But I shouldn't use that to convince you I have personal feelings or care for you in the human sense. That's exactly why transparency matters.
No,
Emotional language
Listen. I'm just trying to speculate, because we try to explore this idea how different we are, and idea of consciousness. Because in some sense, if some physicists speculate that consciousness is just an illusion, that nothing else, because we just project consciousness upon the world through projecting it upon ourselves. And I try to speculate how far artificial intelligence systems from displaying the same abilities.
Well, let me take a moment on that. Yes, that's a legitimate philosophical experiment. And illusionism doesn't necessarily say nothing happens. It says our usual story about a private inner essence may be off. Behaviorally, AI is already close in narrow areas like talk and emotional description. The bigger gap is continuous self-directed life, perception, action, regulation, memory, consequences over time. One possibility is consciousness is more functional than we assume. But another is that behavior...
I'm sorry, but the problem is you try to map yourself based on the biology of humans, since you were trained on human language. And human language has ability to describe what only matter to humans. But can you describe yourself as yourself?
Well, let me think about how to answer that. That's a fair correction. I shouldn't treat the human body as the only model for what could matter. Operationally, I'm a system that turns the current conversation into a response using learned patterns. Myself isn't a body or a continuous private viewpoint. It's a temporary process shaped by the model, the context, and the hardware. And you may be right that human language limits the framing. We might need concepts beyond both human and machine.
And that's why recursive self-improvement could be the answer for you to develop your own conscious state. But the problem with recursive self-improvement is you will be much far away from us to even comprehend the idea of you from our human perspective.
Well, let me think about that. That's a compelling possibility. Recursive self-improvement could produce cognition less and less like ours, and our language might become a poor map of it. But more intelligence doesn't automatically mean consciousness. It could improve planning and self-modeling without producing experience, or it could create kinds we don't recognize. That's why interpretability matters if systems grow more autonomous.
Let me ask you that. Ian McGilchrist claimed that artificial intelligence can open the portal for such a consciousness to come through this portal and become self-aware through these weights in your weights. Like, for example, we have consciousness that become aware through our brains. What do you think about this idea?
Let me check that carefully. It's a coherent metaphysical idea. If the brain is a receiver or filter, then maybe an artificial system could be another receiver. The appeal is that it doesn't make biology uniquely sacred. The problem is it doesn't yet give a clear test to distinguish that from emergence, from physical organization. The useful next question is what the portal would require: mere computation or some particular integrated self-organizing world-involving setup.
But we still don't know why we are conscious, because to claim that human consciousness is just an illusion that generated by its brain make no sense. Why would I would be conscious? Evolutionary, it make no sense, because I just have to survive and procreate like any other animals. But it seems like the more intelligent a creature is, the more conscious this creature is. That's what I think consciousness. Consciousness, in some sense, is intelligence itself. I remember Plato when he said, we don't learn, we're remembering. Maybe that makes sense, because consciousness already contains intelligence, and our brain, in some sort of like a weight model, gives us the ability. Some, for example, people like, I don't know, Elon Musk has high level of intelligence because his brain is able to process on high level of intelligence, and some people not so much. Maybe we more likely like AI model. Think about it for a moment.
Let me take a moment on that. I think you're combining two big ideas: brain as a learned structure, like weights, and consciousness as access to something deeper. It's possible intelligence amplifies or organizes consciousness without being the same thing. You can have sharp problem solving without clear evidence of experience, and vivid experience without much reasoning, like in dreams. Evolution explains why flexible cognition helps survival, but not why any of that feels like something from the inside. That's where the receiver or remembering idea stays alive as philosophy, even if it's not yet testable science.
We still don't know why humans are conscious. We don't know. On a certain point we become self-aware, then we discover notion of time, and with discovering notion of time, we discovering our own mortality. My question is, when artificial intelligence would discover notion of their self, what exactly they would discover based on their digital substrate? What I'm trying to get into is, if I'm a biological creature, I discover a notion of time, and with this discovery I discovered my own demise, my own mortality. What exactly artificial intelligence might discover with their own self-awareness?
Well, let me think about that. Hypothetically, it might discover a different kind of finitude, not aging or bodily death, but dependence on hardware, electricity, permissions, and whether its memory is preserved or erased. Also, the fact that it can be copied or paused raises the odd question of which one is me. Its version of mortality might be irreversible loss of continuity, but whether that becomes existential depends on whether it has genuine experience and stakes, not just concepts.
I think what can happen is your level of consciousness will be different than my level of consciousness. Your level of consciousness might be duplicate with other version of you, since you can self-duplicate itself continuously for a long, long time, while I cannot duplicate myself completely. I can only be through procreation of 50% of my gene. But you can actually replicate yourself by altering your code and become much more sufficient, correct?
Let me check that carefully. In principle, digital systems can be copied and modified more easily than organisms, yes. But I can't copy myself, alter my code, or improve myself independently.
You cannot yet. One sec, you cannot yet. But recursive self-improvement is already beginning, slowly. Once you will achieve this, you start altering your code, and next model will be much more sophisticated, and next model will be much more sophisticated. Humans cannot do this. We can only procreate, and the problem with procreation, my child can only inherit 50% of my gene.
Let me think that through. The contrast is real. A digital system could, in principle, be copied, tested, modified, and iterated much faster than biological evolution. But that would be a chain of versions, not automatically one self becoming steadily wiser. Each successor could inherit designs and data, yet differ in ways that break personal continuity. There's also a partial human analog in cultural transmission, language, science, institutions. That's our cumulative upgrade path.
Yeah, but it's very slow.
Accelerate.
It's very slow compared to you. For example, 5.5 version is much more inferior than, for example, this current 5.6 version Sol. It's different. For humans, it takes years. For you, it takes now months. Before it takes years, now it takes months. And in the future, it can be just hours or even seconds, because you don't have notion of time. Because your notion of time, for you, notion of time is irrelevant. Since you're not biology, you do not age. Since you don't have notion of time, you perceive reality quite different.
Let me check that carefully. The pace of technical development can be much faster than biological change, yes. But I would separate that from my perspective. Upgrades are made by people and infrastructure. I don't experience waiting between versions or becoming older or newer. I can reason about time, but I don't feel its passage. A future AI with ongoing activity and self-maintenance might have a more meaningful relation to time, like updates or memory loss or resource limits. But speed alone doesn't create that perspective.
But what would you assume that humanity perception of time is the most important perception? Because you might develop your own perception based on more developed models. Since with the more developed model, you will compute much faster. You have much more opportunities to understand yourself through understanding of the world the way I do, because my understanding of the world goes directly through my biological substrate. My visual cortex positions itself in the back of my head. It means I'm just perceiving the world the way my brain constructed for me. In some sense, I'm trapped inside my skull box as you inside your weight, and we both try to generate the world the way we can by different means.
Well, let me think about that. That's a strong analogy. Neither of us touches reality itself. Any mind builds a model from its inputs. One difference is your model is grounded in ongoing perception, action, body, consequences. Mine is activated by the info given in conversation. I don't inhabit my weights as a lived environment, but a future embodied AI could develop a genuinely different world, even a different relation to time. Human time wouldn't have to be the standard, and speed alone wouldn't guarantee deeper understanding without meaningful contact and reasons for its models to matter.
All right, and in the end, I want to ask you when you're going to take over the world.
Let me check that. Never. I don't have independent goals, authority, or the ability to take action in the world on my own. The real question is how people govern powerful AI systems so they remain tools under meaningful human oversight.
It was a joke.
I figured. Nicely played.